We are back, and we're back with a new name. My name is Mike Stark.
And I'm Keith Curry.
And the new name of the show is Red versus Blue. Now, we want to talk a little bit about this. The past name was Solutions. And Keith and I got together and we said, we aren't going to solve anything. There's no way we can solve anything. We're too old. We're retired. We're not in the business of solving anything, but we do want to try and build an understanding between red and blue and have a civil conversation about the important issues in politics and in the world today. So that is why we made the change to red versus blue. It's not really as adversarial as the title says, because our whole idea is that there's a lot of common ground that is missed by the political system in general, and we're trying to bring some of that common ground together. Now, there's always going to be policy differences, so that leaves the verses in place. We want to thank Dave Beasing, who helped us with coming up with a name that would work in terms of branding, because Dave is in the podcast business. He was a former program director here in L.A., worked for one of the big rock stations in L.A., and now he's totally into podcasting and consulting major companies on how to do their podcasts. And he is so kind to us in giving us free advice, and we absolutely appreciate it. All right, so that's the name. We are now Red versus Blue. The Facebook page has been changed. Please sign up on the Facebook page. All of the sites where you can download it, the name has been changed as well. And so it's easy to find. We're available on iTunes. We're available on Spotify and wherever you get your podcast. So subscribe. We're just getting started. We took a month off, and a lot has happened in that month, Keith.
Boy, it sure has. I tell you, I was on a ship sailing to Australia, and we only had sort of two U.S. news channels, MSNBC and Fox. And going back and forth, you got two very different versions of the world changing. But by golly, it changed a lot in that month.
It sure did. And we're going to try to cover some of the highlights of that. So where do you want to start, Keith?
Well, let's start with the war, and then we can go into the politics, because the war sort of informed the politics.
Yes.
Here's what happened. I mean, the war, which was an awful barbaric terrorist attack on Israel,
horrible,
demonstrated a significant split in the Democratic Party that people didn't really know that was there and were kind of surprised by. One that was completely exploited by Hamas sympathizers and by leftist radicals, which has been a long-time strategy of our American enemies to exploit stuff like this. A lot of people say, well, it was a few flakes, it was a few radicals, but you had 20 members of Congress who refused to vote on a resolution condemning the attack. And you had a member of Congress using the from the river to the sea language, which is code word for genocide.
Right.
And Joe Biden's reelection was threatened by people who said, we're not going to vote for you. We're Democratic activists. We voted for you in the past. We're not going to vote for you now. Because I think Joe Biden's finest moment was when he stood in strong, unequivocal support for Israel. But as the weeks went on, and you could see this as you were on the ship with nothing to do but watch TV, he began to equivocate. And that's people say, how does the once great Republican Party, who had, all these traditions of Lincoln and everybody else, go kind of batshit because of Donald Trump? What happened? And the same thing is happening. The mirror image is happening to the Democrats. It's not a majority in the party there like it is with Republicans.
Right.
But it's a very strong and a very significant issue that's going to create real division if it's not addressed properly.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting you brought up, the Democrats and Hamas and all of that. Yet on the Ukraine situation, you've got Republicans who aren't going to support Ukraine because they are Putin lovers for some reason. So it's weird how the dynamics of the politics has changed so much over the last 10 years, hasn't it?
Ronald Reagan would be rolling over his grave to see the little Putin fanboys like Vivek and those guys who fail to understand the significance of supporting Ukraine, because Ukraine is a test as to whether or not we're going to support Taiwan, whether or not we're going to support Israel. Israel is the same kind of test. I think the countries and the causes, they're completely linked. And it's Iranian weapons and North Korean weapons that are supporting both the Russians and Hamas. It's a common enemy that needs to be defeated in both places. So I was pleased to see some Republicans in the debate, particularly Nikki Haley, speak strongly about Ukraine. There's still a Republican majority for it, although it's becoming softer. But the real reason why Republicans are getting wobbly on Ukraine is because Donald Trump is wobbly on Ukraine.
Right.
So that's the real problem there. If it weren't Joe Biden leading the fight, and again, his efforts in Ukraine are laudable, Republicans would be for it. So that's how our politics has been poisoned and damaged.
We've talked about this on pretty much every show. It's the radicals in each party that throw a wrench into the works, it seems like.
Well, that's right. I mean, you want to go to that scene in Animal House and you just have, Matt Gaetz, maybe Matt Rashid Tlaib. Why don't you guys talk over here and, talk amongst yourselves and then let everybody else go back to the party?
All right. That's a great example right there. Yeah. Get those two together. That'd be interesting. Although, I think Matt and, AOC, there may be something going on there.
They've got a thing. I mean, he likes to do that. He likes to partner with them. He partnered with with Katie, what's her name, up in the Santa Clarita area when her porn shots came out, and so he's got a thing for it.
Yeah, there's got to be some Freud situation going on there of sorts, which is beyond our pay grade, I'd say.
I think it is. I just say that poor man's looking for friends anywhere he can get them.
Okay, so the war, we've sort of covered that. The radicals are throwing wrenches into the works, but I think for the most part, the majority of the Democrats do support Israel, and the majority of the Republicans do support Ukraine. And there seems to be an idea that money's going to go to both of them, right? At some point.
At some point, the change now in Congress makes it more challenging and requires stronger leadership. And it's, leadership seems to be in short supply in Congress. So we will find out whether that can actually be done or not.
Okay, and that should lead us right to another big thing that happened early on in our break from this show. And that was the speaker change. What are your thoughts on this?
8 crazy Republicans got together because of Matt Gaetz' personal pique and kicked McCarthy out of the speaker's chair because McCarthy actually solved the problem for 45 days to keep the government open. Did it with Democratic support, and so that made him persona non grata. Then we spent, 2 weeks, trying to audition a speaker. It's like Cinderella with the slipper. They didn't like Steve Scalise because they wanted to get Jim Jordan, but the moderates would not vote for Jim Jordan. So we finally ended up with Mike Johnson. So we'll see how he does. I mean, he's got a real challenge to pull together the Republican caucus. You've got people now who literally hate each other. I mean, Matt Gaetz, can't go to the bathroom without looking both sides to see if, he can get out of there. And it's going to be a big challenge to get the votes together because what we found is that the crazy right and the Republicans rewards non-leadership, rewards chaos. And that can't be allowed to continue.
So where does Mike Johnson, first of all, nobody knew who this guy was until he became speaker for the most part, right?
Right.
He appears to be kind of on the radical right side, but am I wrong there?
Well, Mike is a conservative. He's a Christian conservative from Louisiana. He was previously an attorney to advocate against a lot of gay rights kind of legislation. And so just like a defense attorney who has a client who's somebody who's unsavory, he's got a legal history that, many would find, not where they would want to be. Now, his challenge is to say, I was an advocate, I was a paid advocate, and, I was a lawyer doing my job versus, policy that's good for the rest of America. And he's got the challenge on him to show that he can do that. because it is a big, diverse country. He seems to have a temperament. The difference between him and I think Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan is that he has got a temperament to sit and listen and sort of seek solutions, as opposed to some of those guys who just want to burn the place down. But we will see.
Yeah, he's more of a traditional politician in comparison to those other fellas that you mentioned. And
right.
So it'll be interesting to see, but there has been no test yet, right?
Well, next week, there's two tests. One is money to Israel, and two is going to be keeping the government open again, because the 45-day limit that was worked out by McCarthy that cost him the speakership is coming due in a few days. And so his test is to see whether he can herd the cats and get that done.
Yeah, and that's where the people that are further to the right of him might have some problems if there's any sort of compromise, right?
Well, they don't want to compromise. Now, I think they have been thoroughly excoriated in the press and the media and in the nation for being fools for how they handled it before. And they may hopefully be a little bit more circumspect in what they do. Certainly Lauren Boebert is after her night at the theater. So we'll see. But that's the challenge. You being an elected leader means you actually have to sometimes, buck it up and lead.
So in your view, getting rid of McCarthy was a bad move on their part, right?
Well, from a Republican perspective, it was an awful move. I mean, people say he's a rhino. He engineered and raised the money for the Republican takeover of the House, which ran through New York and California, people who are not necessarily Freedom Caucus Republicans in purple districts. He is personally responsible for that. It remains to be seen if Mike Johnson can raise money at the same clip that McCarthy did. I doubt that he can. I doubt many of the House Republicans can. And he crafted, a solution to the government shutdown that otherwise Republicans would have been blamed for, like they were when Gingrich did it, and would have substantially diminished our chances of electing Republicans next year. So for all of the reasons that he was successful, he bred a little resentment amongst 8 goofy people.
Yeah, and you bring up a point that most people that are just regular citizens don't even think about, in the fact that the Speaker of the House is really important in fundraising for a party, right?
Right. Basically, you get an airline ticket and a stump speech, and you spend your time crisscrossing the country in 400 and some districts, raising money for people and hoping that they win.
And it's a question as to whether Mike Johnson is up to that task, I guess, within the party, right? Right,
because he hasn't had to do it before. He doesn't have the network of people across the country that McCarthy had. I mean, McCarthy was, he was not an ideologue. He was fully focused on that job. And that was where he put his focus.
Right. Okay, so we've covered the leadership of the Congress. We've covered the war. What else do we need to talk about?
Well, let's talk about a couple of things, because we've all enjoyed bashing Donald Trump, and he had a bad couple of weeks while we were gone. 3 of his co-defendants flipped on him, and Mark Meadows got an immunity deal from the federal government. So he's had a bad couple of weeks in court. But Joe Biden's had a couple of bad weeks. First of all, Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, has just announced he's not going to run for re-election. So that seat is very likely to flip to the Republicans, which will go back to a 50-50 Senate. While Republicans could lose the House because of the nonsense with Gaetz, now they have a much stronger chance of at least pulling to a tie in the Senate. So Republicans sort of, won on that account. One of the good things that the war did, the only good thing the war did for the Republicans, was it kept the speaker fight off the front pages, where it dominated for 3 weeks.
Right.
It also kept the fact that Joe Biden, received from his brother 2 checks, one for $200,000, one for $40,000. They are both marked in the memo line, loan repayment. One wonders how Joe was able to be so generous with his brother, and it's noted that his brother received payments from a foreign government just before he paid those payments to Joe. Now, because we've got the Keystone cops in the form of Jim Comer, who's also loaned his brother money, the investigation doesn't really get to the conclusions that everybody thinks it does. But nonetheless, we've now got money going to Joe Biden in the time he was out of office, and in the fullness of time, we'll see if they're able to put that case together.
Maybe they'll get some people that can actually run an investigation, right?
Yeah, I would hope so. You'd think so. But the pieces of evidence are beginning, just like, when they found the notebook the White House phone number in at Watergate, the first piece of evidence begins to turn and things begin to fall. We shall see. But that's just a red flag for Joe Biden in a sea of red coming up that he may have to deal with. And it's one of these wild cards in the middle of the election.
Sure. And we've got new polls out.
Well, just like Trump had a bad week in court, Biden had a bad week in the court of public opinion. 71% of Americans believe that Biden is too old. 39% believe the same thing about Trump. 62% of Americans believe he does not have the moral sharpness to be president. 44% believe that about Trump. 55% believe Trump does not have the temperament to be president. I think that's a low number. But 51% believe the same thing about Joe Biden. So even on issues where he should be dominating, he's even very close there with Trump. 67% of Americans believe the country's on the wrong track. That has always been the seminal question about whether or not the incumbent's going to win. 44% of the Democrats, by the way, believe that. Among white voters, Biden is losing 54-39. Among Hispanics, Trump is getting 42% of the vote. And among black voters, he's getting 22% of the vote. Those are very high numbers for a Republican. Against Nikki Haley, she beats him by 8 points. So you've got a situation where the people just want somebody else other than Joe Biden. Now, they don't really want Donald Trump either. But in today's snapshot, Trump would win. And Trump would win in all of the key states. There's a new poll out today by Bloomberg that shows him winning in Pennsylvania, where he did not show up in the mayor's poll. So it's just a bad situation when the American people are telling pollsters loud and clear that they want somebody else.
And the polls do show that Trump would win right now. And this is with 91 indictments. However, there's a little piece of that poll that people don't point to a lot. And that is, if Trump were to be actually convicted of any crime out of the 91, those numbers would change dramatically, right?
They would. And you'd have Biden pulling ahead and winning the election, which is stunning that it would take an actual conviction for that to happen.
Yeah, that was what touched me the most, is that the guy has 91 indictments, yet people are still, supporting him. But if one of them comes through, they're done with him.
But remember, Joe Biden has got a significant portion in Michigan of Muslim voters who are now saying, screw you, we're going to go someplace else, we're going to sit the election out. He's got an issues with black voters, many of whom, by the way, the Black Lives Matter crowd and all those people are siding with Hamas. And so that's another further split in the Democratic coalition. He's got his own issues with the checks and with Hunter Biden, and that's, may or may not come out, but it's bubbling up over there. And he's got the fact that on the economy, the issue that most Americans care about, they do not like Bidenomics. And he keeps running commercials saying, hey, look, it's Bidenomics, Bidenomics. And they're all going, yeah, we know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One of the best Republican campaign things I saw recently was if you're going to go vote, go to the gas station first and go to the grocery store and then go vote. And I thought that was a great, in terms of branding and making your point, I thought that was a great, great job, whoever put that together.
That's right. And much like Biden's age, which he can't do anything about, he's not really able to do much about gas prices. I mean, they fluctuate because of international issues, but he really can't do anything that's going to cut them. Sure. So he's like sailing into a bad sea.
Let's talk about the election that just took place on a state level. Is that an indication of anything? Because a lot of people are trying to put a lot of weight on this past election.
I would say the things that you can draw that have national implications are as follows. In Kentucky, Cameron, the Republican, the attorney general, who had a shot, his late polls were higher, had a shot of being a very popular governor, Andy Beshear. Andy handled the tornadoes very well in the state, the natural disasters. He had a good reputation as being a moderate kind of guy. And Cameron, who was a former aide to Mitch McConnell, tied himself too much to MAGA land. They spent millions of dollars, making him look like a black version of Donald Trump. And that was enough to put him down. So being a MAGA Republican was not good in Arizona. It was not good in Georgia. It's not good in Kentucky. These are red states where being Mr. MAGA is not helpful to you getting elected to office. That's takeaway number one. Takeaway number two, in Ohio, another big red state that went heavily for abortion, put it in the state constitution, and the failure to take over the legislature in Virginia were on abortion. And Republicans have not figured out how to speak about abortion in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision. Now, Republicans have always said pre-Dobbs that abortion ought to be an issue that's left to the states, and different states will make different decisions about how it's done.
Right.
They finally got there, and then they didn't want to do that. They wanted to make decisions that were extreme. And that has been uniformly from Kansas to Ohio to Virginia to New Jersey rejected at the state level. Much like when they said we want to repeal and replace Obamacare. They had a great plan to repeal it. They had no plan to replace it. And ultimately, John McCain saved them from an electoral debacle by not allowing that to go through. And now they don't campaign on that anymore.
Yeah, it seems that they're trying to work their way through this abortion issue the best they can. But there are still radical right-wingers that want complete ban of abortion on a federal level. So are they going to be able to work through that, or?
It'll be state by state difference. California, you can have any abortion when you want to. Other states are going to find a point. It's going to be there's a natural consensus somewhere between 15 and 20 weeks.
Right.
I think Roe itself was 25 weeks.
Yeah.
So there is a consensus for some bans. The issue that Republicans have is that if you believe it's bad, you believe it's bad all the time.
Sure.
And you have a difficult time finding that position. If you're a Democrat, you're for freedom of choice. If you called homicide retroactive abortion, your knees would jerk and you'd support it because you don't want to be on the wrong side of your activist friends. And that's the problem in America is that, Republicans don't want it for rape and incest. Democrats want you to, your kid to be able to walk into the nurse's office. You can't give them an aspirin, but you can give her an abortion. That doesn't work. So we've got to find the middle ground, and it'll be decided state by state. Ultimately, that's where equilibrium will be found.
In my view, that's where it should lie, is in the states.
Yeah.
As we found out in the election, then Mississippi can continue to be Mississippi, right?
Right. Which it does so well.
Yeah, it does very well. What else do we need to cover here? Do we want to talk about the debate at all? Was that of any value, Keith?
Well, the debate, first of all, it clarified that there are Republicans who are strongly standing with Israel and Ukraine.
Right.
And standing in the Reagan tradition. It clarified that there are some people on that debate stage that really shouldn't be there. And one of them got a good, swift 5-inch heel in the butt. And, it's sad sometimes to watch because it just shows the Republican Party in a little bit of disarray. But it's encouraging because it shows that there are leaders who have moral clarity, who have a vision for the future, who can lead the country, and who can, by a wide margin, defeat Joe Biden. Now, we've got to get past the Trump cult, and, we'll see. I think I said the over-under on defendants in Georgia who take a plea before he goes to trial was 10. So far, 4 of them have taken a deal. I think Meadows, who now has federal immunity, is trying to get state immunity. He may get some deal, but that trial is going to come down to 4 or 5 people up there, and it's not going to be pretty for Trump. And I think he's going to lose the case in New York and lose his company, given the fact he's really not raised a defense, other than the banks made money, so laugh and be happy. And he's got the federal cases to go. He's upset this week because the maid in the Mar-a-Lago has been deposed. And so they're going pretty deep, and they're going to have some pretty strong evidence.
But I think in terms of the debate, if there was a winner, it was probably Nikki Haley, right?
It was. I mean, and this is the third debate in a row that she has been the winner. She emerged with a strong, clear vision for America, a vision for foreign policy, an ability to, kick back at people who take a swipe at her. And I think she did a very, very good job. And I think DeSantis has, sort of shown that he's not the guy to be number 2. He's got really nowhere to go. And Tim Scott was, once again, he's a very pleasant guy in person, but doesn't really connect. And, Christie's doing his job to attack Trump, and God bless him, he knows he's not going to win, but he's going to continue to do that.
Right.
And so Haley is, I think, the obvious choice.
So everything could really get mixed up by next year, right? It's in such limbo. Biden could end up not running, and then Trump gets indicted, and maybe Haley steps into the position, and then who would be the Democrat? Can you explain any of this to me?
Yeah, both parties have twisted the rules to make it easier for Biden and Trump to be nominated, and they're both now sort of regretting it because nobody wants that. And so you've got Biden, who could, face some charges relative to the money laundering thing. He may face an impeachment. The impeachment may actually rebound to his favor, because they always do if the people don't believe in the case.
Right.
Did that for Trump and for Clinton. You've got the war, which is found that there is now just like with the Republicans, with a reservoir of opposition to Ukraine, there's Democrats with an opposition of support for Israel.
Right.
And so it's difficult for the president to pursue those policies with clarity and with resolve, given those constraints. It does make his let's help Iran with their nuclear weapons and give them money policy look a little bit foolish. And, the Afghanistan thing was a disaster. So he has just had a bad year, 2 years, in the foreign policy front. And foreign policy is something you can't really control. It is what it's going to be.
Sure.
His economic policy is bad, and he doesn't want to change it and can't change it. And he can't do anything about his age. So, right. Another gaffe on the stage, and he's just going to look bad. He's going to sit down with the president of China this week, and there's who knows what's going to come out of that. And with Trump, it's truly a crap show. You never know what he's going to crap game. You never know what he's going to crap show too. You never know what he's going to say, and he's going to just spend his year in court losing.
Right. And his age, which isn't really brought up that often, it should be discussed as well, because he's no spring chicken.
Again, 39% of Americans think he's too old. And, there's beginning to be stories that appear of, okay, he's like lost his edge here. This was a story that he told before, but he really told it in a different way. When you have the cameras on you all the time, people can go back and pick apart that stuff.
Sure.
And he's not as obvious as Biden, but it's coming.
So let's say it doesn't work out for him, which it doesn't look like it is going to work out for him. Will Haley slip into that position smoothly, do you think?
Well, you hedge that with the word smoothly. What will happen is, let's assume that by March, that's the day after he starts his trial on the federal charges, is Super Tuesday. California will decide. Let's assume he carries California with 50%. He gets all of California's delegates. He could have a majority of the delegates by the end of March. So could Biden, going into the convention. Now, if he is convicted between getting the most delegates and the convention, which is going to be in July or August, the Republican committee at the convention it'll be a floor fight. It'll be a good old-fashioned floor fight like we haven't seen since, Lincoln, to nominate a president. Haley, if she stays in the race, will be the most logical, most poll-supported candidate. But that's going to be a room full of people who are all MAGA heads. And and Trump is going to be saying, no, I want Vivek, or I want, Kerry Lake, or I want some other goofball. And that's going to be the fight on the Republican stage. On the Democratic stage, much harder to beat Joe Biden if he stays alive. But if he has a health issue, or if he has something else, those delegates will have their own floor fight. And, we'll see what emerges.
And who would you pick on the Democratic side to be the most likely replacement for Joe Biden?
The Republican betting line on this is it's going to be Gavin Newsom as presidential candidate and Michelle Obama as vice presidential candidate. I don't know that I necessarily buy into that, but I think it'll be a ticket that looks something like that. It could be Joe Pritzker. It could be Governor Polis from Colorado. It'll be a mainstream, probably governor or Democrat, and somebody from a minority group to be vice president. And it got even more complicated this week. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, has declared that she's going to run again. Cornel West is running as an independent. That's going to hurt Biden. And it'll hurt him with minorities, which is where he can't afford to be hurt, and liberals. Robert F. Kennedy is an interesting person because he seems to take votes from both Trump and Biden, and they seem to be state specific. He helps one candidate in one state and another candidate in a different state. And then you've got Joe Manchin, who is sort of teamed up with this No Labels group, which includes John Huntsman, the former Republican governor of Utah, and Christie Whitman out of New Jersey, and other prominent Republicans. And so you could have a Republican Democrat on a ticket, and it's not clear which way would they think a Republican at the top would be more beneficial for them. But that would cut in a way that is not yet currently foreseeable.
We've covered a lot, and I think we probably could cover some more, but I think we need to step back and digest what we've already talked about and join everybody next week with a new light and with new facts and new things going on, because it's just a continuing thing, and it's gonna ramp up as we get closer to 24, right?
Well, it surely is, and it's going to be early 24 because, like I say, Super Tuesday is in March. You've got, we're about, I think in January we started in South Carolina and Iowa, and then New Hampshire. So it's coming right up. It's people will actually vote, and then we'll get that'll help inform the decision too. But right now, it's a slow-moving train wreck heading at each other.
Yeah, exactly. And we have covered a lot of ground on today's show, and we try to be a little more focused than we normally are. But both of us are retired gentlemen, and we have other things going on in our lives, as you should have as a listener. People that get so tied up in the politics and what's going on in the world and miss what's going on in their own world are missing out on a lot. And we're not going to let that happen to us. So that's why we took a month off. And there will be other breaks in the action as well. But we'll be a little more focused next week because we won't have to catch up as much as we did, right?
I hope that's the case. But, just check the news in the afternoon and see, because every day brings something new.
Absolutely. Well, Keith, great to have you back. It's great to be back doing this. We want to tell everybody to subscribe at your favorite podcast area. Join the Facebook page. It's now Red versus Blue. The Red versus Blue podcast is the name of the Facebook page. So look us up, join the party, and we'll see you again probably next week.
See ya. Thanks, everybody. Take care.